Our 1000th episode is coming out in June, and I know you wanna send me a present. You probably wanna Venmo me some money or do something, but you don't have to do that. The best present you could give me is to go do a review. We are trying to get 1,000 reviews of the podcast by the 1,000th episode. If there's an episode that stands out to you, something that's impacted you, and you've never done a review for Practice of the Practice, head on over to your favorite place that you listen to the podcast and do a review. We are trying to get 1,000 reviews by our 1,000th episode. Would love for you to go leave us a review for the Practice of the Practice podcast. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 989. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast. I hope you are doing great today. We are kicking off a new series today on psychedelic-assisted therapy, and we're going to be talking to some therapists, practitioners, researchers as a part of this series, and I'll tell you a little bit more about our guest in just a second. But if you haven't picked up the Harvard Business Review book in the airports that I'm in, feel free to check that out. It's in airports, it's at Barnes & Noble, it's all over the place. Harvard Business Review just released that here in early May. So make sure you check that out as well. Now, I'm really excited to talk about the psychedelic assisted therapy series. We did a series similar to this a couple years ago, and at the time, a lot of people, that was new information to them, and to even just see in just a couple years how much there's more discussions, there's more better treatment approaches. The FDA is thinking about things differently, and that's why I am so excited for Jonathan Robinson, who I have here today. His team actually reached out to me and didn't even know that I was going to be doing this series. His book was just sent to me, Ecstasy as Medicine, How MDMA Can Help You Overcome Trauma, Anxiety, and Depression and Feel More Loved. Jonathan is a psychotherapist, best-selling author of 14 books, and a professional speaker from Northern California. He's reached over 200 million people around the world with his practical methods, and his work has been translated into 47 languages. He has made numerous appearances on The Oprah Show, CNN, and other national TV talk shows. Jonathan, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm looking forward to this exploration.
Yeah, well, I'm now 1 degree away from Oprah. Like, I'm not sure if that's happened yet. So thank you for that for my own ego. No, I would love to hear, how did you get into the field of MDMA assisted therapy?
Well, I was helped by the fact that I had a highly dysfunctional family. So I was pretty depressed and suicidal as a teen. And I came across MDMA as well as other psychedelics. And I found that it was really helpful in unwinding my trauma and neuroses. And then when I got into graduate school, at UC Santa Barbara, I did my master's thesis in 1984 on the effects of MDMA or ecstasy on PTSD. And the results were like incredible. But the US government then made it illegal like 3 weeks later. So that's how I got into it. And I've been doing underground MDMA therapy as a psychotherapist ever since.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, people talk about the dark ages of psychedelics or things like that, and to have people like yourself that have continued that work, continued that research, um, as you've been practicing over all these years, for those that are listening and maybe they haven't kept up with the news, what would be the quick version of what you see and what the research points to that MDMA is helping people with?
Well, originally in the 1970s, it was used by a lot of psychotherapists with amazing results in couples therapy, in trauma work, and also anxiety and depression. And so then it became a dance party drug, but using MDMA for all night dancing is like using a laptop as a doorstop. It will work.
Mm.
A laptop does work as a doorstop. MDMA does work as a dance party drug, but it's really incredibly effective as a therapeutic tool. And I tell people that it really does 2 or 3 years of therapy in one day if you know how to guide people correctly. And so the research shows that it is much better than anything ever discovered for helping people with PTSD. And other studies are showing that it's very effective for helping people overcome loneliness and addiction as well. And I think as the studies proceed, it'll be like kind of like a Swiss Army knife that it just greatly accelerates all therapeutic outcomes.
Mm. Now, I want to definitely dig into MDMA, especially because your current book is about that. But even more broadly, because this is the first episode of this series, when you think about psychedelic assisted therapy, just as a big umbrella,
Mhm.
um, what how do you personally think through and I don't even know if you've worked with other plant medicines or things like that, but could you talk through maybe what else you've worked with and maybe how they differ and in their use and helping people and helping the mind? Would just love anything beyond MDMA that you have expertise in.
Yeah, actually, I do write about that in Ecstasy as Medicine. Different things work for different people and they have different focuses. So, LSD has been shown to be very effective for helping people with addictions or end of life uh, issues. Psilocybin has been shown to be very effective for helping people with depression. Ketamine also has been shown to be very effective for helping people with depression and also helping people learn to meditate effectively. And then there's things like 5-MeO-DMT and ibogaine that have their specialized purposes. I describe all that in the book, but I do think that MDMA specifically is more useful in therapeutic contexts than all the others. I have led journeys. I've led about 700, 800 journeys over the last 40 years. And I do find that MDMA is easier to work with, more effective, and has kind of more uses than the other drugs, although everything does have its place.
I find it interesting how people don't even blink at asking their doctor for Xanax for getting worried on an airplane or for having Adderall if their kid has ADHD or we have so many drugs that are just part of living a quote better life or overcoming challenges. But then a lot of the discussions around psychedelics, shift where, therapists and well-meaning people say, well, what about addictions? What about all these, isn't that a gateway? And a lot of these conversations just aren't based on probably the reality of the science and all of that. A- And you and I are, I think cut from the same cloth in regards to this topic, but I would love to hear when people bring up that to you and saying, well, wait, you're advocating for these drugs. Like, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think everything is based on how well you use it. Alcohol can be a nice social lubricant for some or an addictive hell for others. Every drug has its potential upsides and downsides. But when you actually do the research in terms of what helps people overcome psychological challenges, the FDA is learning that nothing has been as effective as MDMA in clinical trials. That's why the FDA, for the first time in its entire history, is likely to make MDMA a medically prescribed legal drug after 50 years of making it illegal, because the studies showed that A, it's very safe, B, it's not addictive, and C, is if used therapeutically, it can cure people and help people at a almost phenomenal rate. So that's what I say, that I'm based in science, not based in hearsay or fear tactics from the government 50 years ago. And I think
Mhm.
that the word is coming out. That's why the FDA is going to change its legal status. And I think that we need to keep doing good studies with these medicines, because I think that many of them can be much more effective than the uh, things like antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs that are currently out in the market being marketed by big pharma.
Yeah. Now, take us through what a typical MDMA therapeutic session looks like. If we were a fly on the wall, can you just walk us through? And it may be more than just the day of. Like, what kind of prep goes into set and setting? Uh, what goes into that day of? What kind of follow up is there? Walk us through kind of that whole process.
Uh-huh. Well, I do a 30-hour training on how to become an MDMA facilitator. People can learn about that at mdmatraining.net. Um, so there's a lot to say and in terms of how to do this legally, safely, effectively, how to avoid contraindications, how to some people are very surprised I do 95% of my work actually over Zoom. We found out when the pandemic started that it actually works better over Zoom than in person, which was very surprising to everybody, including me. Um, but what I do is I schedule a 1 hour Zoom session with somebody to find out what their issues are, what success looks like, what might be some contraindications. Like, for example, you really shouldn't do MDMA while on antidepressants because
Mm,
it mutes the effect. And we discuss various things that will help with the actual journey session, which I schedule usually about a week later. We meet once again, usually on Zoom. I schedule up to 5 hours, and it's not that unlike a 5 hour therapy session, just much deeper, much quicker, and much more effective. I go into some childhood stuff. We often can neutralize traumatic memories. I go into asking questions like, well, what do you really want? What's in the way of more peace or love in your life? The medicine almost seems to have an intelligence of its own that brings up stuff that needs to be worked on. I, I usually feel like I've done 2 or 3 years of therapy with somebody in that 5 hour period. Um, then once that is done, about a week later, we do a 1 hour Zoom session again to integrate the insights and behavioral changes that people want to make into their daily life. And I came up with a motivational method that really helps people to stay motivated consistently to make and keep those changes. So that's a little bit of what it looks like.
yeah, and obviously, we should say it that this is not a replacement for your training. This is not a training for someone, that at this time it's still considered illegal. So make sure that you have any proper sign offs from the FDA before you enter into any of these types of modalities. Now, when you
Although
think about,
I
yeah, go
should
ahead.
I should say, Joe, that the way we do it, we do avoid doing anything actually illegal, although the client is taking medicine, which, as of this date, is currently illegal. That will likely change in a few months. So the therapists aren't at any risk because you are allowed to talk to people and guide people over Zoom. But you are correct that the client is actually ingesting what is currently an illegal drug.
I appreciate that clarification. I think that's important to have that nuance in these discussions.
Mhm.
When you think about a therapist becoming a guide, what for you are some internal work, some things that they need to be working on before they even take a training like yours?
Well, it actually helps if people have a little bit of familiarity with these types of medicines or altered states of any kind. I think the biggest thing that helps is, you know, being curious about somebody else's mind and patterns. That goes a long way. In fact, in the course that I teach, we don't require that people be a therapist, although we do require that they have experience working with people. Um, the other thing I think that's very useful is uh, having certain therapeutic techniques that they are good at, and I teach those in my training. These are things that a lot of therapists would be familiar with, like prolonged exposure training, where, on MDMA, it reduces blood flow to the amygdala, the fear part of the brain. So people can go into past traumas or difficult experiences and be in a very peaceful state that neutralizes that difficulty. Also, people learn specific ways to feel more peaceful or more loving. I do some things where I help people learn their unique path to an open heart so that they can, when they're not on the medicine, get back to a place of love and peace much more easily. And that's been a real big part of the training and what I do with my clients.
Mm. Yeah, I know for me, the first time I did MDMA was when I did a psilocybin journey, and my guide said that she thought pairing that with psilocybin would mute some of the fear center of my brain because I was really anxious about doing that journey, but I really wanted to. I really felt called to it. I thought about it for a while, and then I had done it one other time where it was just very therapeutic setting. Um,
Mhm.
I think it's so important to kind of understand those medicines, and so having worked with a guide personally, and then done an ayahuasca journey, and planning to do more. For me, it just keeps helping me just appreciate, like, the same message for me keeps coming up for myself of you get to be Joe. Like, wow, like how awesome is that? And to have that appreciation, even for the last journey I did, I remember walking past my daughter's bedrooms, and they were just so so much junk. I have 9 and 12-year-old daughters, but just crying as I looked at it, like I get to be a father to these kids. As you look at your own life and some of the impact that working with these plant medicines or these medicines, what has it done for you personally?
Well, it's good to make a distinction really between MDMA and all these other medicines because they work very differently and there's a very different experience. LSD, psilocybin, they're the reality kind of melts. You can have hallucinations. A lot of people find them very helpful for spiritual awakening in terms of seeing things that they didn't see before that were kind of blocked out. And for me, as soon as I took LSD or psilocybin, I started meditating right away. I wanted to get back to that place, but without the drugs. When it came to MDMA, though, it was more working on a psychological level where, I had fears of talking to people. I had fears of everything. I was also depressed as a teenager, and it opened me up to how I was creating that depression through certain thought loops. So I think of MDMA as being a great psychological tool, but it can also be used to help open your heart to in relationships and to see and overcome some of the patterns that people bring into relationships that don't work. I've been happily married now for 25 years, and I'm pretty sure my wife and I would not be married at all if it weren't for the work I did with MDMA. And so, it does work differently. A funny story is many years ago, I was very enthusiastic about this with my parents, and they said, "Well, can we try it?" And I was surprised that they wanted to try it, but I got them the medicine and told them how to set up a proper set and setting to take it, which they did, but they never told me anything about it. Maybe a year later, I asked them, and I said, "Did you take it?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah, we took it." I said, "Well, what happened?" And they said, "Nothing happened." Now, they had read about drugs and they thought that they were going to melt into the couch or something. So they took it, and uh, I said, "Well, what happened that night?" And they said, "Well, we took the drug and nothing happened after 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Well, it ends up it takes about 45 minutes for it to take effect." And I said, "Well, what did you do after the drug didn't work?" And they said, "Oh, well, it ends up we sat on the couch and we talked about how much we loved each other and how wonderful our lives were and how lucky we were. And then we cuddled on the couch for a couple of hours. It ended up being the most wonderful night of our entire marriage. The only disappointment was that the drug never took effect." So I'm laughing this whole time because they didn't realize that that was a drug. And in fact, MDMA at low or medium dosages, it doesn't feel like you're drugged so much as it feels like you're just your most open, loving, uh, sober, clear self that you've ever been. And that's one of the things that I think makes it unique in the spectrum of psychedelics.
Yeah, I appreciate you differentiating that. Imagine the impact you could have with your clients when you are able to practice the most cutting edge modality available today. Psychedelic therapy is the future of mental health care, and the Integrative Psychiatry Institute will empower you with the tools and knowledge you need to master this exciting modality. IPI's comprehensive training and in person experiential practicums will elevate you both personally and professionally. This in depth curriculum is the gold standard certification in the field. When you join, you will step into a global community of thousands of innovative colleagues who are integrating psychedelic therapy into their practices. Visit psychiatryinstitute.com/apply, where you will find all the information you need about IPI's training. And when you visit psychiatryinstitute.com/apply, you will also receive IPI's free e-report on the current state of psychedelic therapy, so you can get the most up-to-date information immediately. Again, that's psychiatryinstitute.com/apply to learn more about the training and get your free report. When you think through the future of MDMA, you had mentioned that at the time of this recording, probably the FDA is going to change the way it views it in the next few months. Um, like, what do you anticipate happening in the field?
Well, what's going to eventually happen is they're going to create clinics where you can do MDMA therapy. But those clinics are going to be very expensive, somewhere between ten and $15,000. Whereas me and the people I train tend to charge more like 1,000 to 1,500 bucks, 10 times as less. So I think the underground movement is actually going to explode. Everybody I know who's an MDMA guide in the underground movement is booked up like weeks or months or sometimes years in advance. Uh, so it's already popular, and when it gets all this publicity, it's going to become very popular in the underground movement, where people, therapists are going to. All the therapists I know who do this are booked at least 3 months in advance, and that's going to get even more so. That's why I'm trying to train so many people. Uh, but the clinics will eventually open up. Insurance will eventually pay for some of those clinics, but that's going to take somewhere between 2 and 4 years probably before any of that develops.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting how many of these things end up becoming such big businesses, and then oftentimes there's business licenses that then squeeze out the average practitioners and things like you see
Yeah.
that with the marijuana movement, and so many other things. um
Hmm.
so I appreciate you kind of walking through, especially with your parents, how those effects are. When you think about therapists, for the therapist experience, obviously it's a longer session, 5 hours or so. What are other aspects of it that are different, and what are aspects that are the same in regards to going into an MDMA therapy session?
Uh-huh. Well, I, have been a therapist for 40 years, but I often spend maybe a lot of time, maybe up to a year, just getting rapport with people, getting them to trust me fully, getting them to feel understood. In MDMA, that takes about 10 minutes.
Mm,
And I'm a little bit impatient, so I prefer getting right down to the, not doing all the preliminaries, but getting right down to almost like rewiring their brain, which you feel like you're doing. It's a very sacred, very moving experience, not just for me, but for them. and they enjoy it. Often in therapy, people are resistant in small or big ways. That tends to disappear completely in when somebody's on MDMA. People who are afraid to gain any feedback are like totally open to honesty. When I would do couples therapy on MDMA, the couples are very, they let go of their blame and they are very honest with each other in a caring way. It's really quite a transformation. I often get a contact high. Obviously, I don't take the medicine, but when you're with somebody in such a deep, honest place, sincere place, wanting to work on their stuff, it it it's contagious. So I often feel very loving and very connected to my clients when they're doing this type of therapy. And sometimes the medicine will bring up something that you didn't expect. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, my wife and I were having difficulty in our relationship, meaning she was getting very angry at me for reasons that neither she nor I understood. So we hired a MDMA guide to guide us. And once the medicine took effect, what happened was my wife started to remember that she had not taken the time to see her dying aunt 3 months earlier. And she was very upset at herself for this and cried about it while I held her. And that was what was like keeping her upset. She was really upset at herself, but she was taking it out on me. Well, neither she nor I nor our therapist thought knew that that was going on. But once she became aware of it and forgave herself, her anger at me was totally gone. So sometimes it will unearth something from somebody's childhood or something in their life now that is very unexpected. Yet when it's cleared out, the person has a transformation.
So awesome. Well, I know we could talk, I mean, you have a full course, on this that people can go through. But the last question I have is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I'd like them to know that this is a great new breakthrough technology that, if used properly with the right intention and methodology, can accelerate all kind of psychotherapeutic breakthroughs very consistently, and that it's worth checking out. Obviously, the book or the training, and that I think as time goes on, people are going to recognize it just because it is so effective, and that's why the FDA in 2017 classified it as a breakthrough therapy.
Hmm. Yeah, I know a friend of mine is a psychiatrist that's a head of a major medical system, and he is very excited about the potential. And it's one of those things that it's a really great time to be in this field. So, if people want to get your book, if they want to connect with you, where should we send them?
Well, you can get the book on Amazon, but I have a website, xtcasmedicine.com, and they can get the book there or learn a lot about various things for free on the book. And also, I have handouts on how to avoid bad psychedelic journeys, great questions to ask people when they're on a psychedelic, and that's all free. And they can learn about the training at mdmatraining.net and learn all about that and contact me through my website as well.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for being on the Practice of the Practice podcast.
My pleasure, Joe. Great questions.
Well, if you are in our communities of Next Level Practice, Group Practice Launch, or Group Practice Boss, we are having more of these kind of conversations in there, as well as conversations about business, about growing your practice, marketing it, all those different things. So feel free to check out all that information over on our website, practiceofthepractice.com. If you're like me, you like to gather a lot of information before you make a new decision, like adding a new modality to your practice. That's why I'm so excited that our sponsor for this series, the Psychiatry Institute, has put together an amazing e-report called The Current State of Psychedelic Therapy. You can get that totally for free over at psychiatryinstitute.com/apply. That's where you can get that free report, The Current State of Psychedelic Therapy, again over at psychiatryinstitute.com/apply. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.